Good evening, everybody. How are you guys doing tonight? Wednesday night. I want to thank you guys for joining us here as we continue our conversations with series. As you guys know, this is a series I started up probably late last summer, and I started talking to different candidates, having them on, usually going about an hour, and we talk about the things that are important to them, find out their motivations, what it is that got them motivated to want to run for a public office. And of course, as always, I'll throw that offer out to any candidate that's running for statewide office, county office, school board. I want to have those conversations with you because I truly do believe that this is one of the ways that we can get, these candidates out there, get the names out there, help them with fundraising, donations. Because let's face it, money makes the world go round, right? But it also gives the candidate the opportunity to talk to you guys, or you guys actually more so listening in on the conversation we're about to have and see the human side of the candidate, find out what it is that motivates them and what they're looking for with the state of Wisconsin. Because as I often will tell you guys, Wisconsin deserves better. Now, before we start the show, I want you guys to do me a huge favor. Make sure you please smash that like button, share this episode out, put it up on all your social media platforms if you could, all the Facebook groups that you can, because we want this information out here. Now, of course, we have rules. Let's make sure we follow them. Rule number one, please maintain respect and decorum in the chat room. I expect that because I want you guys to respect our guests here and respect the platform. Rule number two, ask questions. We got the chat room here. We got Sandra already in there. How are you, Sandra? And yeah, so two rules, pretty simple. Just follow those and everything's going to be good. But let's bring on our guest right now, Ms. Joan Ellis Beglinger, who is running as an independent for the Wisconsin State Governor. Joan, good evening, and how are you today?
Good evening, Ed. Good evening, everyone who's listening. I'm great. How are you?
I can't complain. I'm better than I deserve.
I've heard that expression before. I probably am too.
Oh, yes. You know, I'd like to complain, but half the time when I do, it's like, it's more laughable than anything else. So I try to refrain from doing anything like that. But um, let's jump right into it. You're running for governor.
Absolutely.
I got to ask the question that I ask everybody right from the get go. Um, why? I mean, like that's just you put yourself out in the public eye. What is the biggest motivation to want to just say, you know what? I'm not even running as a Democrat. I'm not running as a Republican. I'm coming in as the independent.
That is true. Well, I should probably start by saying, in case members of your audience aren't aware, this is the last thing in the world I ever saw myself doing. I'm a retired person. I had a very long and wonderful career as a registered nurse and as a hospital administrator. But as I was enjoying my blissful retirement and watching what is happening in our country, I decided that our freedom is under assault. And there's no way that I'm just sitting by and watching what's happening in the country. So as I evaluated, so what can I do? And I looked at what my skill sets are, what my experience is, and how I could best serve. I decided that since the governor is the chief executive of our state, we have a $40 billion budget, 30,000 employees. That's what I know how to do. I'm an administrator. When I was a hospital administrator at St. Mary's in Madison for 22 years, I was responsible for a $200 million budget, and we produced excellent outcomes. So I believe the values I hold and the skills I have make me an ideal candidate to come into the governorship at this time.
And I think it's a phenomenal background you have. We were working as a nurse, and then of course as an administrator. My ex-wife, she happens to be a nurse, and it's funny because I found that over the years, if you're around somebody with a particular skill set, you kind of learn a little bit through osmosis. So I've picked up a thing or two, having been around her, um, and it's kind of funny because it's navigating the waters in an administrative facility of at a hospital. That's not a small task.
No, no, we were a large hospital, 440 beds. and we're what we call a tertiary referral center. So we took care of some of the sickest of the sick, and we served 18 counties in south central Wisconsin. And so when many of our rural hospitals would find themselves caring for patients who ended up being too sick for the services they could provide, they would send them to us. So we had all different kinds of service, to the most critically ill, to birthing babies. We had a neonatal intensive care. So yes, it's a very complex operation. The work we do is life and death, literally.
Literally.
So being humans, we are prone to make errors and so on. And so the effort that goes into ensuring that you have the most exceptional care possible it's a big job. And I worked with wonderful people, and I learned very early in my administrative career that it is not the people in the administrative offices that produce the outcomes for the organization. It's the people on the front lines who are actually doing the work of the organization. So we were able to create the conditions for the nurses and the other clinical people in that hospital to do absolutely exceptional things.
Well, and as an administrator, I would imagine that you would have to do a lot of. There are certainly, the rules and regulations that come from on high and funnel down, but I would imagine you also had to do a lot of relationship building with other hospitals, other smaller counties that you do work with. So I would imagine you have a skill set there.
Absolutely. And to be honest with you, not so much me as the team of people I worked with. But one of the things that happens in the hospital business when you're in a hospital like mine that is equipped to do really the most technically complicated things, you help the other hospitals in the surrounding communities build their skills and help them be as capable as they can be, so that when they do get patients who are sicker than they can really comfortably care for, they can do a good job until they can get them to a different place. I have one short story just to kind of illustrate that. One of the things I always did as the vice president for patient care at the hospital is one day a month I would put on my scrubs and I would go out and spend the whole day on a unit working side by side with the nurses. I was not taking care of patients because clinical care is something you have to do on an ongoing basis.
Yes.
To stay competent. But I could see what patient care was. That was very important to me. And I wanted to see what the impact of our administrative decisions were on the people who were actually caring for our patients. So one day I went on the ambulance ride with a neonatal nurse and the neonatologist and a respiratory therapist to pick up a baby who was about 1 pound in one of our rural hospitals. So that ride along was such a source of pride for me to watch, first of all, what a beautiful job the sending hospital did while they were waiting for help, and what a beautiful job the people I was working with did. And so, that was very typical of how care in the community would work. But for me, it was quite a joy and quite a sense of pride to see how incredible those people who actually were doing the work of the organization were.
Well, I think that's an important thing. When you look at people within leadership positions, you'll often find, the criticism that's levied by people in the field is that, well, leadership doesn't really know what's going on because they're not in the field with us. So the idea that you made it a point to go out and be in the field periodically, I think that definitely shows a willingness to learn, listen, and see how the decisions that are made from the administrative standpoint, how that trickles down. And in a way, that is governing. Now, and I want to get into this because this is the big reason why we want to have this conversation. You're running for governor. Let's kind of transition a little bit here. So you definitely have the executive experience, but rather than run, and I looked over your website, and guys, check out that website right down there. Everything about your website, the conversation we had in Wausau a couple weeks ago, to me screamed conservative. But you're running as an independent, not as a Republican.
Right.
I'm fascinated by that. I wonder if you could elaborate on that, please.
Sure. And that is one of the things that has brought me into the race. I believe both of our parties have been corrupted by leaders that chase money and power and rarely produce anything that people care about. So corrupted is a strong word. Another way for me to describe it is they've disqualified themselves. Year after year after year, we watch the same political maneuvering, and we see that we have gotten to such a point now where it's really about which party can jockey for position and power. And as I said, there's very little for the people. And I've been on the road a long time already, meeting thousands of people in Wisconsin, really. And I have to tell you, the idea that the parties are not working for us in any fashion that we care about, that is a very prevalent idea. So as the audience and you might realize, the challenge, particularly being an independent, is that nobody knows who I am. I do not have the political machinery behind me. I do not have the big money. So I have to build name recognition. So I'm taking a very different approach to my candidacy. I'm taking it right to the people for that reason. But not only do I think the parties have disqualified themselves, but we have career politicians rather than the citizen legislators that our founders envisioned. And they are chasing after, how can I get elected again, rather than doing the work of the people as well. So my theory is that someone like myself who rejects the party politics but comes highly qualified to this candidacy is exactly what we need as people to send a message to our politicians and to our parties that we intend to reclaim our government and our political process.
And when you, one of the things that really strikes me is that last thing you said, reclaiming our government, reclaiming our political process. In doing so, how would you be able to work with individuals from both parties in order to do that, knowing that there are some people that are, I'll call them establishment, anybody who's in there, 15 plus years, and you made a career out of getting elected time and again? To me, that's about as establishment as you can get.
Right.
And then, of course, you're going to have newbies and libertarians running as Republicans. How would you work with those individuals to kind of get them on the same sheet of music, as it were?
Well, it's interesting because I get asked that question so often. People say to me, nobody's going to work with you because you're not either of their parties. And my response to that is, well, that is exactly why I need to be running. If that is true, that people will or will not be productive because I'm not the right party. So my intention will be to have objectives in mind. I'm going to be all about outcomes. One thing we don't see, we see a lot of process, but we see very few outcomes. So I am going to be focused. I mean, if I had to simply state what's most important to me, I think the role of the government is to protect our rights, the rights that we've been given by our Constitution. So that will be very much a framework. And then we will be pursuing those things that I believe will have the most positive impact on our state and on our residents. And I will have, if I am elected governor, and I shouldn't even say if, because I honestly believe we can do this, and I intend to be the first woman nurse independent governor our state has ever had. If the people elect me, it will be because they want what I am proposing. And then I'm going to have to rely on them to keep the legislation in check. And if the legislators are not working with me in good faith, because I'm going to be working in 100% good faith, then I'll go to the people and I'll rely on the people to fire the people that are there for reasons other than to work for them.
Certainly. Well,
it sounds simple. It'll be immensely difficult. I have no doubt that I can't even imagine what I will find.
Well, and that's interesting, because yeah, anybody can lay out a plan, but once putting that plan in motion, you're looking at what is essentially a Herculean task. And I think that's the
Absolutely.
same for anybody who is going to assume the mantle of the governor of you pick your state. Now, that being said, there are a ton of issues going on here in the state of Wisconsin. Even right now, some of the comments here we had, and I'm not going to mispronounce anybody's name, so I'll just go put the comment up here. She mentioned here, Grace, someone who is going to keep the status, or are we going to get rid of the bloat? The medical system's completely broken, which is a comment that, I think is some people, both on the left and the right do share. Kevin mentioned on here too, talking about COVID and the COVID protocols. And of course, we know about some of the funding that was being done for the hospitals for COVID and whatnot. But then you had issues like CRT, election integrity. You got rampant crime that's just gone nuts in places like Milwaukee. What do you, if you had to prioritize, what would the top three things when it comes to Wisconsin? What's the top three for you?
Well, what I'd like to do is reflect what I'm hearing from people. As you know, Ed, I actually formally entered this race last April. And because I am unknown and because I don't have the backing that the politicians will have, I have literally been traveling the state and I've met thousands of people. So, what I will tell you, I'm hearing as their priorities, and I would agree, election integrity is huge. What happened in 2020, it is really a source of great concern for so many people. The Democrats, and aided by the media, they want nothing to do with seriously looking at what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And the Republicans, all the while we saw laws being broken and many things being done under the guise of COVID,
Yes.
that were wrong, they did nothing. So here we are. And so we need to make clearly defining and tightly controlling the rules of elections going forward a very high priority. And one of the things on my mind, I hear some candidates, candidates like to throw around, here's what I'll do in my first 100 days. I'll do this, I'll do that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have to be honest with people. It isn't even entirely clear to me what can the governor do unilaterally, what requires legislative involvement, those kind of things. But this is what's on my mind. The Scott Walker, Rebecca Kleefisch administration signed into law the Wisconsin Election Commission during their governorship. And that was after the legislation passed that to replace the accountability board.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me the accountability for our elections has to rest squarely on the shoulders of the legislators. So I'm not seeing why we even need a Wisconsin Election Commission, but I'm not going to be so foolish as to say I'll abolish it, because I don't know if the governor can unilaterally do that.
Right.
But I will be pushing hard. You're going to hear a theme of accountability from me, and that's something we have very little of in government. And what I mean by that is responsibility for outcomes. I think the legislature needs to be 100% accountable for the integrity of our elections. And we have a whole list of things from, democracy in the park, drop boxes, curing ballots, grant money coming in from outside interests to fund our elections. There's so much stuff that we know needs to be clearly addressed, and it needs to be addressed by the legislature. So that's one. Another one you mentioned is rising crime. Rising crime, we all know what the truth is. Crime is rising because we have a liberal view that somehow criminals are victims. And we have district attorneys who have backed off on prosecuting serious crime. They somehow feel that there's inequitable treatment if criminals are jailed. So the bottom line is I would have to rely on experts in law enforcement and the law, but I will support whatever it takes to stop the crime. Here where I
Sure.
live in Dane County, we've got 13-year-olds jacking cars in the middle of the night. So crime is an issue. We cannot live free if we cannot safely go out and walk on our own streets.
Hmm.
And so crime's got to be stopped. And it is rising exponentially. And there's a reason for that. It is the policies that are being implemented that are turning their back on the real problems.
Right.
The economy, obviously, is another one on the list. Everyone is paying ridiculous prices for gas. We were energy independent. And the stopping of the Keystone pipeline in the first days of the Biden presidency was nothing but a political maneuver that did nothing but hurt a lot of people who were employed by that pipeline. And now we're hearing, we have such dishonesty in government. Now we're hearing, oh, now we have Ukraine as a wag the dog excuse. And now we're going to tell people that in the interest of the Ukrainian people, we're going to all have to bear the burden of higher gas prices, which we know is a lie. So there's a lot of things like that, but the lockdowns, the unconscionable closure, basically locking down our economy under the guise of COVID, which was an indefensible act and harmed our economy and our workers greatly. So the economy is big.
Yeah.
A lot of this is happening at the federal level, but some of the things I'm very interested in as governor are how we budget, because I bet most of your listeners are not aware that during the Scott Walker administration, he commissioned a commission to look at waste, fraud, and abuse in the government.
Right.
And I have that report. And the chair of that report was very concerned about how we budget, because we just keep building on what we have. And if we don't spend it, we lose it. So there's a lot of principles of solid financial management that are not at work in our state government. And I have a lot of financial expertise from the $200 million budget that I was responsible for. So that's an area I'll be very interested in looking at. And I also know that we don't use what are called generally accepted accounting principles, which means when our governor tells us about the state of our state and
You
tells
saw
us
that too.
what great financial shape we're in, we're not using the same rules that every other business has to adhere to. And that can give a very falsely rosy picture of what the situation is. And that will be another thing that I'll want to delve into. And then, of course, businesses have to thrive in Wisconsin. We have to have all types of businesses of all sizes and all types. And they have to be able to function here without undue regulation, unnecessary regulation, and undue taxes. So we want to make this a state where businesses want to be. And conversely, however, we want our businesses to operate with integrity and create fabulous work environments so that people have a place to be self-sufficient and realize their dreams and live free. So economy is huge, and we have things we can do locally, and there are things that will be driven by what happens federally, but I will be very concerned about that.
One of the things that I'm looking at, and you covered a lot of material here, and I could probably do a 4-hour show with you on this because there's so much to unpack. I live here. I live in central Wisconsin, and over the years, I've moved everywhere around this country. I was a military brat, was in the Marine Corps. My ex-wife was in the Navy, and I just felt like not settling down for the longest time. It's all right. I got to meet a lot of people. But in doing that, every time I ultimately ended up coming home. And right now I am in central Wisconsin. I live in a little county called Washera County. And the small businesses are the heart of everything. I mean, yes, we got a Walmart nearby. Yeah, we got a Pick and Save here. But the bulk of business around here, the bulk of the people that have jobs is the small mom and pop bars, restaurants, boat stores. The guy down the street's got a motorcycle shop. It's his shop. It's not a Harley chain. It's nothing like that. It's a mom and pop shop. And I think it's incredible, because if you look at the way that your average business owner has to run their budget, has to be accountable for whatever regulations they have to deal with. If they don't have money, they can't spend it. It's amazing the way government works, though. When I was in the
Right.
Marine Corps, we had the same thing, and I forget the exact title, but it was like, if you don't spend the money, if you don't use it, you lose it. How did we get to the position? And I don't, maybe you might not know, but maybe you have a better solution, where we reward financial irresponsibility, because I think that sets a terrible precedent for young people. Like, oh, let's just spend money like, like the government.
Well, I don't know exactly how we got here, but I want to add something that I think is very related to what you're saying. And that is, one of the great concerns that I have is the government is using dependence as a political strategy
Oh, yes.
to grow the size and the power of government and have more control over the people. And so when you talk about, money we don't have, the idea that we were paying people unemployment that exceeded what they were making in their jobs, encouraging them not to work, the idea that there's a big push to write people a check for every child they have, these kind of things. We cannot be free if we are dependent. And so dependence on the government has to be rejected. And I think particularly to some of the younger generations, it is so appealing, this idea of free money. And it's a huge problem. I wish I had some, magic answers that I thought were going to be useful. But I will say one thing: you can always count on me to be truthful.
Yep.
And we don't have a lot of truth. We have a lot of lying and a lot of untruthfulness in how we function today. And I don't just mean politicians. I think we have to take a good long look in the mirror and really do an inventory on our own moral code and how we as individuals feel about what's right and what's wrong. So I think a leader speaks the truth, and that is something that you can rely on me for. But the idea of use it or lose it, and padding these budgets, and trying to push into the next year and build on instead of start from ground zero. I'm used to zero-based budgeting. So if you have people in your audience who are familiar with budgeting in their work or even in their home, every year I would start my my $200 million budget. We started at zero. And we had to project, so how many patients do we think we'll have? And that's the whole strategic planning process.
Mm-hmm.
Is the population growing? Is the population aging? Is the birth rate climbing? You consider everything that you can possibly know, and then you project what you think your business will be. And then you build a budget that says, what are the people and materials and other things that we will need to provide the care to that amount of patients? And so we never acted like, well, that 200 million budget, we start there and we get to keep it. We had to start over, and we had to build it analytically and ask ourselves, what will drive the money that we need? And that was always the work we thought we'd be doing. So I don't know why the government gets a pass. It should not get a pass, but it's just been the way things have been done for so long. So one strategy I'll have for sure is exposing the truth. So if we are, for example, painting a picture of our financial status that is far rosier than the real picture, if we account for everything the way other businesses do, then I'll do a side by side, and I'll say, here's what it really looks like. Just like this idea, we have this $3.8 billion surplus right now.
That's billion with a B. Remember, billion with a B.
Right. Right. So we've got a surplus, and then next year it'll be a shortfall. And I don't know if your audience has kept track, but I have. We've had $20 billion flow into Wisconsin as COVID relief from the federal government. Where is that money? And what, if any, outcomes have been produced? I keep seeing Tony Evers passing out, a couple million here and a couple million there. And what I want to see is what outcomes are tied to that money that is given to whatever group.
Right.
If you give $150 per student to a school, why is our proficiency in reading, writing, math, and science less than 50%? We have got to identify what the outcomes are we're after, and we've got to hold ourselves and other people accountable to achieving them.
Well, I think there was so much about, Tony Evers' State of the State address that was just, it was half truths and outright lies. He's talking about how we have this 3.6, $3.8 billion surplus, but, we're going to give that money back to the people, $150. It's like, ooh, that's life-changing money right there. It's if you're going to give money back to the people, then why don't you actually give money back to the people? I understand the concept of a rainy day fund, because things always go sideways, and in the larger at scale, the more sideways it'll become. But if you have that much, then maybe we need to start looking at cutting back taxes. Maybe we need to start looking at, you know, funding schools that need to be funded instead of dumping money after places like MPS in Milwaukee in particular. He had the audacity to sit there and say, we're in the top 10 schools in the nation, Wisconsin. But yeah, we had to keep throwing money after, Milwaukee, and we're going to pick on Milwaukee in particular since it's the biggest group of, biggest school district in the state. But it's like, how can you say we're doing really good, but we're doing really bad on the same breath? And I think this goes to your point. You got a lot of folks here, this band included, that are just spinning half truths, outright lies. And I had a note here, and I wanted to get to this. And I think it's almost, to your point about the idea of, the strategy of political dependency. What can we do to increase your whatever benefits? What can we do to pay you off? What can we do there? I almost feel like this is a cultural problem, though, and it's a cultural problem created by government. How do you correct for that?
Well, it is a cultural problem. I don't know if it was created by government. It's certainly being abetted by government. Self-sufficiency, in my view, is an absolute requirement to freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And so my approach will be, any one of us can get into a problem, an unforeseen problem, serious illness, I don't know, something that requires us to need help. And I want to emphasize here, I'm all for that. I think we should be a compassionate society.
Yes.
But I will also say dependence cannot be a way of life. And I think dependence is a way of life for many, many people. And we need to understand why able-bodied people are not working and self-sufficient. Because the other thing I believe is that dependence is destroying people.
Yes, it is.
So people who are not self-sufficient are being deprived of the joy of achievement. I was just with my 18-year-old great niece, who's a nursing student and works as a nursing assistant, and she is working her little tail off.
Yep.
She picks up all the hours she can. She's in school. She's studying. She is go, go, go. And I happened to see her. She lives in central Wisconsin, too, and I was staying at her grandparents' house. And I asked her what she had studied in school that day. And she said to me, Maslow's hierarchy. And of course, I remembered that from my school. Yep. And I said to her, are you self-actualized? And she said to me, I think I am. And a lot of people would look at that young lady and see that she is going from dawn until late at night and working very hard, but she has the joy of achievement. And we are depriving people of that. So one of the things in that report I mentioned to you that Scott Walker commissioned was that well over 1 million people were on some sort of assistance. One of the things, and I'm not saying that's bad, good, or indifferent. One of the things I will want to do is understand that. Because again, people need to be self-sufficient, and we need to look at how our systems are set up and whether they reinforce dependence or whether they are truly a leg up to independence.
Right. Well, I think that's an important distinction that we need to make here, because oftentimes you'll see people on the left, they'll criticize conservatives as, I don't know if you remember that one Paul Ryan election where someone was saying, Paul Ryan just wants to drive Granny off the cliff.
Oh,
And it's
yes.
like, no, he does not want it. But if you sell it to a lot of the, politically uninitiated people, those that aren't really, in the loop, oh, they might buy it, but when you look at these half truths, it negates the fact that conservatives believe this more so than anybody else. We, as a civil society, have a fiduciary duty to take care of those who cannot take care of themselves. The problem is that when the system has been, the bar is here, and let's say you have a mental health issue. My eldest daughter, she's high functioning autistic. I use that as an example. She may or may not be able to live on her own. Time will tell. But those are the type of people you take care of. The quadriplegic, people like that, somebody with actual health issues. But we keep lowering the bar. Oh, if you had a bad day or whatever, you got PTSD because you ran over a squirrel, something like that. We keep lowering the bar, making it easier and easier for people to game the system. And I think that's the problem. It de-incentivizes people to want to go out there and become the best versions of themselves. It's this idea that somehow, because I exist, by God, you owe me $15 an hour. And then you're mad because that loaf of bread that you used to pay 99 cents for now costs $2. There's this lack of financial literacy overall. And I don't know if that's something that's within government's purview, if that's something that can be, talked about in trying to get this new generation of kids, the millennials, even Gen Xers like myself. To be honest, I really didn't become financially literate until I'd probably say about 3-4 years ago. So, I'm late to the game. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there are things that are the government's work, but the governor should also be a leader. And I think leaders can and should talk about anything that's really important to our health as a society. So I think another component of what you're talking about, and again, this absolutely is not for government to fix, but I think a lot of what we are dealing with in our country today is a result of the breakdown and what has happened to the American family.
Agreed.
Because I would say from the 50s, early 60s to now, we have seen a dramatic, what I would consider to be a decline in the American family. And what I mean by that is parents in the home loving and wanting and supervising and teaching their children how to live.
Yep.
Teaching them right from wrong, teaching them the tools they're going to need to be successful in life. And, I think in fairness, I don't know, I didn't hear what Tony Evers was using to measure our schools. And I'm sure we have fabulous schools, but we have a lot of schools that are failing. And what I mean by failing is the fundamentals. I think that we are paying our tax dollars to school up until the 12th grade so that our schools can begin to prepare young adults who will have the tools they need to be self-sufficient. So to me, an excellent measure is proficiency in reading, writing, math, and science.
Yep.
Less than 50% of the kids in the public school system are at that level. And I don't know if some of your audience and yourself saw the report card that the Department of Public Instruction put out of maybe a month or two back, but it was a joke.
Sure.
Because instead of just black and white, here's what we're doing. Well, we factor in how many kids are socioeconomically deprived, and we do
Yeah.
all these things to end up saying, well, it's really okay. They're really doing okay given their lot in life, which I think is the greatest disservice we can do to anybody, is to treat them for any reason like they can't compete. So we can't lower the bar. We have to raise the bar. We have to look at our families. We have to have parents that are engaged in doing their jobs. The teachers can only do so much. If the teachers don't have parents at home riding herd on the kids, there's very little they can accomplish. And I like to say society cannot compensate when the family is failing to do its work.
No, I think you're absolutely correct about that. I would even venture to say we can probably go into the 60s and start looking at the slow, decline of the nuclear family, a strong male role model within the home, a loving and supportive, mother and father. And it's interesting because I've noticed, especially when I look back in my readings and everything from like the 80s and 90s in particular, it's interesting watching how conservatives have kind of pulled back from everything. Because if you look at what the left control, they control all the cultural institutions, they control the educational system. And why did they get those things? They got it because conservatives and involved parents, they kept pushing back or stepping back, as it were, and saying, you know what, I'm tired. I work all day. I got to come home. I got to deal with the family. I got to do this, that, and everything. And an excuse is an excuse, legitimate and or otherwise. But the problem is that if we don't get involved in the systems, we can't necessarily be mad at these schools when they're operating under the in loco parentis concept in lieu of the parents. We've gotten to the point now where the schools actually believe that they have more parental right than the actual birthing parents, as it were. And I think that's the frustrating part, because this is where we're getting, CRT. Now we're getting, this SEL, selective emotional learning. Um, schools over here telling parents that you shouldn't be involved. You've got Merrick Garland from the Department of Justice talking about involved parents in these school boards being domestic terrorists, which
Right.
leads me to my, the big thing here. This is why I'm so, now use the word, hell-bent on wanting to get everybody talking here on these matters, because I honestly believe we need to get the right people in office this year, because we need a seawall against an overreaching federal government.
I agree. Well, the schools, I mean, I'm encouraged by the awakening of the parents. I do think I see one of your guests wrote, parents are working, parents are busy. I have
Yes.
nieces and nephews who have children. They're tired, they're busy. But you know what? You have children. That has to be your top priority. So you've got to figure out how you're going to parent. And I think I will admit, I think I was asleep at the switch,
Yes.
because it was only a year or so ago, maybe two now, I don't know, when the CRT concept came to light. But I think many of us were unaware of what was going on in the schools. And all of a sudden, we're way down this road of social theory indoctrination, I'll
Mhm.
call it. And we're not proficient at the fundamentals, but we've got all these touchy feely, kids need to be taught to be critical thinkers.
Right.
And I think we leave the social aspects, how to live, that's the work of the family.
Mhm.
So I don't know exactly how we got here, but I think a lot of parents have awakened to what's going on, and have made it their business now to know what's going on. I know a lot of young parents who are going to their school board meetings, who are running for school board,
Yes.
and really that's going to have to be taken over at the local level. The parents need to get involved, and they need to get people on their school boards that reflect the values that they want reflected in their school systems, in their communities, and pretty much focus, I think, the people, the curriculum and so on the fundamentals. The other thing I personally believe, it's all about outcomes.
Yes.
So if we have outcomes that need to be achieved through the education process, then I think any school setting that can produce those outcomes should get that per pupil amount of money that we are spending at the state level on education. Whether that is a private school, whether it is a homeschool setting, the issue should be results, because I'm not going to be a governor that would prop up failing schools and
Mhm.
keep throwing money at them, because I believe in competition in everything we do.
Yeah.
And failing schools will not survive. And environments that can produce high level outcomes and do that consistently, they'll thrive. And so that's another thing we need to do. The money has to flow where the outcomes are, and
Right.
not just, we keep talking about we need more money, but we never hear discussion about what that money is going to produce.
When I think oftentimes, especially in your larger school districts, you start seeing, top heavy administrators. You find people that are, I don't know, the vice president will pick your department, and they're making, a good mid six figure outcome, annual income. And it's like, well, why are you making six figures? And you got kids that can barely read their own name, write their own name. They can't even tell an analog clock.
Right.
Um, you can't give me a signature in cursive, but you need more money coming your way. How exactly
Right.
does that work?
Yep.
So, uh,
Well, you're reminding me of something I would like to let people know. I do not like hierarchy. So I can only imagine what a nightmare I will find the state government. But in my role as vice president at a very large hospital, I had 1,500 people working with me. There
mm,
was me as the vice president. There was one director for each nursing unit, which was about 35 patients. And the nursing staff that worked on there, maybe anywhere from 75 to 100 people. There was me, there was a director, and there was the people who did the work. It was the flattest hierarchy that I've ever encountered, and all the human resource experts told me that was too broad a span of control. But we
mm,
produced some of the best outcomes in the country, so I would have none of that. So I believe when you have limited resources, you put them at the point of service or the point of care. You put as much money as you possibly can, not into creating bureaucracy and highly
right.
paid administrative people, but into the work and the people who do the work.
Well, I think there's something to be said. You put the money where it's needed most, but you also incentivize your people, to put the best value they can out there, which I think this goes back to something you had said earlier, the joy of achievement. And I think, for so long, we've had so many young people that just feel a sense of entitlement, and they've grown into adults with a sense of entitlement. This idea that, what, I should get access to whatever education. Oh, you should if you earn it. I should have this job if you earn that. Um, it just feels like, you'd like to say where it goes wrong, but it's almost like you can point to almost any year within the last, I don't know, 20 to 30 years and say, yep, went wrong here, went wrong here, went wrong here. Um, and it's really maddening because I think when we look at the people of Wisconsin, that we see them, we go out on the roads, we see them every day. They work for the Department of Public Works. They work for the local store down the road. They are out there working their tails off, trying to just get by, take care of their families, be a part of the community. Um, and one of the things I love most about Wisconsin so much is that there is this sense of community within the state. There is, and I guess I'm my concern is, as governor, you also have the ability, through the bully pulpit, to encourage a sense of community, a sense of the Wisconsin culture that is so famous everywhere. Um, how would you use that to inspire people to become literally the best versions of themselves they can be?
Well, I hope I would lead by example. I think most people are wonderful. People are good. They are caring. They love their families. They want to pursue their American dream. They want to live free. Um, that's just what I believe about people. And we have to challenge each other. Why are we afraid to let our children fall down and learn how to get up?
Yes.
Why aren't kids getting jobs as soon as they can and working and contributing to their college education or whatever it is they want to pursue? It just seems it all actually what I think we have such a wonderful life in this country. There is no country that comes close. And we have had it so good. If times were harder, we would probably be tougher. But we have had it so good. And by having so much materially and just having the good life that we have,
Yeah.
people have been deprived of things that are really important. I got my first job at the Five and Dime when I was 15 years old, and I loved it. And my mom's
Yeah.
rule was you save 2/3, you spend 1/3. I had $1,000 in 1970 when I went to college. That was
Wow.
a lot of money at that time. I worked at Sears to pay for my bachelor's degree.
Hmm.
Sears at Brookfield Square. I paid for my bachelor's degree at UW Milwaukee. These are things nobody can take from you. These are feelings of accomplishment that have so much to do with who we are. And all I can say I would do is talk about those things, lead
Right.
by example, challenge people to ask themselves, why they're doing things the way they're doing. Are they getting the outcomes that they're hoping to get?
Mhm.
And, together, I think we are a great people and we're a great country.
It reminds me of a phrase. I don't know if you ever seen the movie. It's kind of corny. The book is much better, as in most cases. It's a book called Starship Troopers, and in there was a teacher, and one of the lessons he was trying to teach his students was that something given has no value, and I think that's something that's really lost upon a lot of people.
Yeah.
Um, I want to double back here to something that we were talking about earlier, and we didn't really dive too much into, but I know this is a really big issue for a lot of people, and it's the idea of election integrity. Now, there's a lot of people that think that Trump won the election and that it was stolen from under him. There are some people that say no, Biden won outright. I'm kind of split in between there because it's like, okay, who's sitting in the Oval Office right now? Right, wrong, or indifferent? Who's sitting in the Oval? Um, but there are so many questions, so many questions. Like, why was there a ballot dump in the middle of the night on election day? Why was there issues in Rock County? Why were there issues with the voting machines? Democracy in the Park, which you had talked about already. The ballot boxes. I get it. COVID was scary. A lot of people were saying, okay, what do we got to do to try to make things work? Did you think about maybe following the law? I mean, let me just throw
Right.
that out there.
Right.
Um, and I get it. People were scared. I totally understand that. But that's not an excuse to go ahead and, say, hey, when do we start following the law, as was reported, um, not too long ago. So when we talk about election integrity, there are folks that will say, you know what, we can't look at 2022 if we don't fix 2020. To me, that's a bit short sighted. I'd like to kind of get your take on this, um, and just kind of see, what you would like to see done, what can be done.
Retrospective, prospective, or both?
Let's go both. We'll go
Okay.
all in.
Well, there's a lot going on retrospectively right now, right? So, and there's a lot of wrangling going on. I mean, it's typical politics, right? So we've got the Gableman investigation,
Yep.
we've got the Democrats, and they are, I have to say, for your audience, I believe one of the greatest threats to our freedom is the dishonest media.
Agreed.
So our media is supposed to be our founders envisioned a free and honest press as the watchdogs of the truth. And if they were doing their job, all of these other threats we face would be less serious because we'd have a true investigative journalism. But instead, we have a media that has its own political agenda and is pushing its own political agenda. So the Democrats and the media are saying there's nothing to see here, move on. And really trying to make Gableman look like a caricature, and Voss and everybody else. And there does seem to be dissension within the Republican ranks about how to approach this. There's a committee in the Assembly, there's a committee in the Senate, there's Gableman's work, and everybody's doing all this stuff. And what is the outcome it's going to produce? I think we know enough by knowing that many laws were broken. I mean, that's not disputed. What I wouldn't personally say is I don't know what the total impact of all those laws being broken was. We know Biden was given 20,000 more votes or something like that. But I will say this, Biden is in the second year of the presidency. And there is no way that I believe that's going to be changed. And anybody that is out there suggesting that we are going to somehow reel back in our votes, our electoral college votes, and Biden is not going to be the president, to me, that is a total waste of time. We know enough about all the things that went wrong. Some of it might have been loopholes, things not well enough defined. A good example of that is indefinitely confined.
Yes.
So I saw the numbers on that, and I'm sorry, I don't remember what they were, so I'm not going to quote a number, but there was a huge number of indefinitely confined people this last election compared to what normally would be. I had a cousin who was a quadriplegic at the highest level. She couldn't even breathe without a ventilator. She was indefinitely confined. But the idea that people used COVID to call themselves that was just outrageous. But I don't think that broke the law as I understand it. I think it's just the law is that sloppy, that they were allowed to do that. So we have laws that need to be tightened up and clarified and then tightly controlled. And we have violations of the law that occurred that can never occur again. And this is where I think the whole question of how do we get the responsibility back into the legislature? Should we abolish the WEC? I'm thinking yes, because I don't think 6 people who are appointed by highly partisan parties is going to be what we need to monitor elections. So going forward, that's what I think. I mean, I don't object. I would like to know as much as I could about what actually happened. Another example is that grant that the Zuckerberg Foundation, those grants that the foundation gave, that wasn't illegal as I understand it, but it darn well should be. And the legislature should be, I think they're working on laws right now to make that illegal. There is no reason parties from outside of our state should be able to dump millions of dollars into our election process. We don't need that kind of help. And it is highly suspect as corrupt.
Well, and we know, Zuckerberg certainly did that. We had Eric Holder, I think it was in 2018. He dumped a lot of money into some of these races. And I know he did it during a special election. I think under Hagedorn's race, Justice Hagedorn. And then, of course, you got the Justice Democrats. These are the guys that were responsible for AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Cory Bush. They're pumping money all over the place, trying to get their progressive candidates out there, which is just insane. But, they like to say that they're the champion of the people and they don't deal with dark money. But that seems to be their whole stock in trade. This comment here, I think this is a huge one because my observation, and I would love to share yours here. When all this pandemic stuff began, again, I understand people were scared. Hell, I was scared. The only reason I didn't show that fear and I went about doing my business like it was any other day was because I have a 10-year-old at home and I need to show this kid that, you know what, one way or the other, you got to get out there and make things happen. And it's okay to be scared. It's okay to say, you know what, we're dealing with an unknown factor. but you got to be brave enough to face that fear. And that was a big deal for me. So I would go out and I would handle my business like I would any other day. I know a lot of people that did that too, but I knew a lot of other people, they buckled, they fell, they became crazy obsessed with the mask. They became crazy obsessed with you shouldn't do this. And if there's a highlight for COVID, I would definitely say it's people got to washing their hands. Um, but we had one executive order after another. And as I understand it, Tony Evers only had one shot at this, a 90-day shot. That was it. But he had one executive order right after another. How would you have dealt with this pandemic and any future ones? And granted, with any future ones, we're dealing with a what if, looking into a crystal ball. But knowing what we know now in retrospect, taking a look here, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, the response to COVID by the government, in my view, was the greatest abuse of power that we have seen in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you said, it was a new virus, and very early, we didn't know what it was going to be. I mean, for all we knew, it was going to sweep through our country and take half of us with it.
Right.
But very soon, we knew that for most of us, it wasn't a threat at all. And our immune systems are strong and would take care of it. We would maybe have a flu-like bug for a number of weeks. And we knew also that there was a very vulnerable population, the
Yes.
chronically ill and the very elderly and frail. So they need to be protected because they could be severely ill and they could die. But as we learned more, the government was very deceitful. They did not share the information that we needed to make our own decisions. So number one is our freedom is the most important thing from my perspective.
Yeah.
And we absolutely must push back hard and not accept mandates from the government to wear masks, to get vaccinated. All of those things were absolutely unacceptable, and they were not rooted in science. And as we learned more, they learned that scared people are very easy to manipulate. And this has dragged out now way longer than it should. And they're gonna, I predict March 1st, when Biden gives his State of the Union, he's going to declare somehow there's victory. There is absolutely nothing new here. So the kinds of things that I would be focused on would be providing all of the information that is available. So here are just a few examples of things that were done that were absolutely untruthful and unacceptable. So we keep hearing about the number of cases. Well, as you all know, testing. I mean, people were going and standing in line. They weren't sick, but they wanted to know if they had it. So the cases have nothing to do with illness. The cases were how many people tested positive. The deaths, I just looked up the figures now that Omicron has hit so many people. So 23% of Wisconsinites have tested positive as of today for COVID, which means a whole lot more of us have had it because a whole lot of us had it and didn't get tested. So 13% of the population. Of the people that tested positive, less than 1% have died.
Right.
And 4% of the people who got COVID have been in the hospital. You would never know that by the press coverage and what we're being told. That is a very small number of people, and I guarantee you the vast majority of those have chronic health problems.
Yeah.
So we have partial information given to us, and we have doctors who disagree, and this is really unacceptable. Doctors who are very credible who disagree with what is being done are silenced. And that is the antithesis of how science has to work. People have to debate the data. there's a whole lot more I could say, but I'm thinking maybe I'm running over your time. I'm not sure. So,
That's all
um,
right. That's all right because
okay,
it leads to there's like I said, I could probably go on here with you like 4 or 5 hours, but I do have a couple of things I want to get into. Um,
okay,
you know, because I think I'm seeing some states do this here, but I'm going to get to this in a minute. But I wanted to comment real quick. You were talking about the case counts from the testing and everything,
yeah.
and it was kind of fascinating when you come to find out that, well, they were chalking up everybody as having died with COVID. And it's like,
Oh,
wait a
yeah,
minute, with COVID or from COVID? Which one was it? Or that one
exactly.
cat down in Florida, he got into an accident on his motorcycle and he ended up dying because, when your head impacts a car, that's generally what happens. You will die. And of course, he got chalked up as a COVID death.
Right.
Here was the real kicker, though. I found out that if I went in, I was feeling under the weather, I go get tested. Okay, that counts as a COVID test. That's a positive. But I want to get checked again. That now counts as two COVID positive tests, not
Yeah.
one, because I'm one individual with two tests. That counts as two positives. The numbers were just so messed up. I was
Yeah.
just blown away by that.
Right. So, Ed, that is either incompetence or deceit, both unacceptable.
Hmm.
So, I want to just tell you something else. I've been watching the Wisconsin Department of Health website throughout this whole COVID
Yes.
thing, and they changed it when it started to become clear that COVID was not the dangerous virus that it had been thought to be.
Hmm.
They completely changed the website, and I want to tell you, it is extremely difficult to find useful information on there. They
Oh yeah.
buried us in data. It initially it was a very easy to read and follow website. Data is not information. We are buried in data. Data has to be
Hmm.
interpreted to make information. And right now, I have a master's degree in nursing. I have to dig and I have to do my own analytics to make anything out of that website. So your point on the deaths, we don't know how many people actually died from COVID because everyone who died for any reason who tested
Hmm.
for COVID is in that death count. And that's unconscionable. This whole thing, whether it was deliberate or, as I say, incompetence, they're equally unacceptable.
Yeah.
My bottom line for how I will govern: people will decide what is best for them and their families. I will do everything I can to make sure they have all the information they need to make a well-informed decision. But we have a right for self-determination, and if we make a bad decision, if we even make a decision that results in our death, that was still our decision to make.
Yes.
And that is the most important right to protect.
It's important to live free, to be a free man, free woman,
Absolutely.
you know. And I want to get to this topic last here because I think this is very pertinent to the overall conversation. Several things you said certainly touch upon it. I don't know if you're familiar with what Section 220 is.
No, I'm not.
Essentially, it's a federal law basically, and I know it's steeped into another one, and I don't remember the overall title offhand, but basically it is a protection for big tech like Facebook, Twitter, that if I write something inflammatory on there and God forbid somebody acts upon it, Facebook doesn't get sued for it. They're not liable for that. We're seeing all kinds of censorship happen there from the doctors, the what were those doctors? Not Doctors Without Borders. Um, Frontline
What is
doctors.
this? Frontline doctors.
We frontline doctors, if you happen to have a contrary opinion, as it relates to COVID,
Right,
I remember when this began and the idea of lab leak hypothesis came out, and boy, you would get suspended, you would have your account
right,
taken down. Now that's the prevailing theory out there. If you were saying anything in support of, Trump's rally on January 6th, if you didn't call it an insurrection, you would get a video taken down. That happened to me on YouTube. Um, the There are states now that are looking to say, you know what, big tech, social media, you're not going to have those protections here in our state. You're either going to be a platform that's open, the commons, as you will, or you're going to be held liable like a publisher since you're censoring everything. With
Yeah,
all the censorship that we're seeing here on from big tech, and big tech is the town square now. We don't have a
right,
town crier. We got people online here.
right.
Um, and maybe this is something that you might not have given much thought on, but I figured I'd just ask the question anyway, considering everything that we've talked about. Everything goes on social media. What are some thoughts on that?
Right. So I actually have given it thought. What I will be truthful about is I'm not well informed about what the laws actually are, what is federal versus state. There's a lot I have to learn. But as you said, so social media is not just like, in my view, any other business, because I do believe businesses have a right to say this is what we're about. And,
Right.
there are some limits to that, but businesses have some rights. But I think social media has become so much, I like your term, the town square. This is how people communicate. This is like, just like the internet now is like, you need the internet because it's
Right.
like having a telephone. I mean, it's just so fundamental to how we communicate. So I think it takes on a different status, and I think it needs to be addressed in a different way. But in my view, big tech is trampling on our First Amendment. And this idea, I believe, as free people, we should be able to say and do almost anything.
Yeah.
I don't care if it offends somebody. The ability to say and do whatever we want is what being free is.
Yeah.
And if we say something offensive or do something offensive, or it's not accurate, then somebody needs to come back with a better idea or facts to refute it. But the answer is not censoring people.
Right.
And this whole idea of what's going on with censorship, I mean, I think Congress needs to get in there and address, people love to run to their lawsuits. I don't know if lawsuits are the answer, but this censoring people who are expressing an opinion, and most importantly, having employees of these companies decide what is misinformation. The
Right.
government has been spreading misinformation about COVID for a year. So, some young kid working at a tech company is making a judgment about what's misinformation. Yeah, it's out of control, and it's got to be stopped. And we got to push back hard on it, because we cannot allow ourselves to be censored.
Well, I think that's an important distinction too. You got this some young kid that's just barely out of college, who's over here talking, like, oh, I'm a fact checker, I'm independent, and it's like,
Yeah.
whoa, easy there, son. I don't think you have the life experiencing to even walk up to me and have this conversation. But it is a wicked world that we live in, that's for sure. Dan here, I want to go to this comment real quick. He said the Chinese Communist Party controls social media. Why can't a states control access to platforms that censor through in-state internet providers? It's a great question. I would have to wonder if at that point does it become state-run internet providers, and do we necessarily want to go down that road? I don't know. It's an interesting thought, but
So I'm not sure I understand what he's saying here. Why can't a state control access to platforms that censor through in-state internet? I honestly am not understanding what exactly
I'm
that
sure
is.
Dan can clarify that here later on. I know him and I
Yeah,
him and I are going to talk
yeah,
about that pretty soon, because I know we've had
yeah.
conversations about something akin to this. But as
What
we
I'd
close this
like,
out, oh, go ahead, please.
what I'd
Yes, ma'am.
like to have is free and open communication. People talking about their ideas,
Yep.
saying what they believe, not having somebody else evaluate whether that's misinformation. We need to be free to express ourselves, and the First Amendment guarantees it. And we are going down the wrong road. And
Yeah.
that's basically my position. The particulars of what a state can do, or I'm going to have to learn a lot about that.
Yeah. And there's so much nuance to everything. But as we close this out, Joan, I want to thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate that. I'm going to give you the last word here. Throw out your what do they call your elevator pitch? The sales
My
technique.
elevator pitch. Well, I would like to thank everyone for tuning in and listening to what I had to say. I hope that you are interested enough to go on to my website and begin to take a closer look at me. We are going to have a lot of conservative candidates. And one of the things that is probably very true is we're going to agree on many issues. So, the way I am differentiating myself and what I'd like to ask you to do is I like to say competence is not what we say we're going to do. Competence is what we've actually achieved. And I have a very long, very public track record of some of the best results in the country in 22 years administering, being the chief nursing officer and vice president for patient care at St. Mary's Hospital. So I am asking you to evaluate me and who I am and how I'll govern based on what I've actually done, not what I say I'll do. And I'm asking you to evaluate me against every other candidate and what they have done and who they are and how they will govern. And if you believe, as I think you will, that I will be the most highly effective governor, then I'm asking you to join me in building the greatest grassroots movement our state has ever seen, because we can win this race. I think we must win this race. I think we will win this race. And finally, because I don't have big political machinery or big dollars behind me, I will tell you that I am funding my campaign by asking 10,000 people at the grassroots to donate $10 to my campaign. So I would appreciate it if you evaluate me and I earn your support. I would appreciate it if you would consider being one of my 10,000. If you go to my website, it's very easy to donate. And also, please push the button that says join the email, join our email, because very soon I'm going to be sending out updates on a regular basis via email. So thanks again. It's beglingerforgovernor.com. And I hope that I will win your support.
I want to thank you so much. It's truly a privilege and an honor to speak with you. We talked a couple weeks ago in Wausau. I think we probably had a good, 4 or 5 minute conversation, but to have this in-depth conversation with you, thank you. I have nothing but respect for you, and I'm humbled by your willingness to give us the time and to talk to the people that are out here. And I just want you to know we're going to have this rebroadcasted on Rumble, BitChute, and on every podcast platform that's out there, all the aggregators like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, all that good stuff. And if at any other point you want to come back on, please let me know. We will set that up.
I'll be here if you invite me.
Yes, ma'am. All right. Thank you so much, Joan.
All
Have a
right.
good
Thank
night.
you, everyone. Good night.
All right, folks. That was Joan Ellis Beglinger, excuse me. Phenomenal candidate here. She's running as an independent, so I highly encourage you guys, check out that website. Take a look at the website there. Check her out. Listen to what we have to say. Share this episode out here. Get the information out to people. As I told you guys before, I'm not backing any one candidate or anything. I haven't thrown an endorsement out here, but I am looking at every candidate. And I would encourage you guys to do the same. Listen to them. Read what they have. Hear what they have to say. And at the end of the day, let's remember, we need to do what's best for the state of Wisconsin, because bottom line, you guys deserve better. Wisconsin deserves better than what we've had. So I want to thank you guys for joining on here tonight. Really appreciate this. Like I said, I'll have this rebroadcasted on several different platforms here, probably later tonight. Until then, everybody in the chat room, thank you again. Joan, thank you again. And we will talk to you guys real soon. Good night. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. God bless Wisconsin. We're out.